Hey everybody, it's Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich with SkiSoutheast.com. Here we are, the new year has turned. We had a great start to the ski season in the Southeast, probably the best start I've seen in at least 10 years across the entire Southeast. But obviously in the last week or so, we've seen things kind of get a little milder, not horrible by any stretch of the imagination, but we typically see one of these January thaws, and it looks like we're going to have at least a little one here that's going to continue into the new year. But there are signs that we're going to see the pattern start to slowly change, especially going into next week. Let's start with what's going on here this weekend. We've got this low pressure system, which a couple weeks ago, if you saw this on the guidance, you probably got pretty excited. But the problem is there's not enough cold air for this system to work with. So it's mainly rain, but on the back side of this low, as it moves over the southeast, and even though the guidance is not showing it, there is going to be some snow in the higher elevation. So a good chance for some natural snow going into Saturday morning. On the backside of this low, and there might be a little bit of northwest flow right there at the tail end. Now we're not looking at huge amounts, but this is a cold pocket of air aloft. This is one of those 500 millibar lows, so they typically tend to bring in some colder air, especially at the higher elevations. So even though the guidance is not showing snow, trust me, there's going to be a little bit of snow on the backside of this thing as it moves through Saturday morning. It moves off to the east and then exits the region. You can see the northwest flow picking up this weekend a little bit, so a good chance there might be even some snow down towards Snowshoe, Wisp, possibly Winter Place, but this isn't an ideal northwest flow situation. Most of the flow is more out of the west. We need it more out of the northwest, which isn't really great. The other thing you notice in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, we see a ridge building. This is not what we want to see over the southeast. We want to see a dip in these lines, which would mean at least cold air at the very least and the chance for storminess. So this is going into the weekend, and then early next week, you see this ridge building early in the week. So early in the week, we're not going to see a very good chance of either cold or snow in the southeast. It's kind of a mild pattern. But as we go through the middle of next week, you see this low pressure move across the middle of the country in this cold front. It's going to cross the area on Tuesday into Wednesday, and this is going to usher in a little bit of a pattern shift. The pattern goes a little zonal, which means everything's moving west to east, so no ridge, no trough, but we're starting to see the signs of some cold air beginning to come to the south and maybe a little trough of low pressure developing that could impact the southeast. So as we go towards next Wednesday, so this is Wednesday the 9th, you can see there's some storminess and some cold air coming over the Great Lakes, and it looks like a dry cold front moving across most of the southeast. So right in here, there's a cold front crossing. There's another one here, and behind it, that's the northwest flow you want to see, especially on Wednesday afternoon. Let me back this up. I got a little carried away there. So this is Wednesday night into Thursday next week, and you can see this is a much better setup for snow and cold. Notice we've got our dip in the pattern here. This is cold air, and we've also got a lot of moisture coming off the Great Lakes. So this is your typical long-range lake effect that's going to affect the southeast. And with the warm water of the lake still not frozen yet, we're seeing a lot of this moisture being deposited downwind. So next Wednesday night into Thursday, we're going to see the potential for maybe a pretty good little northwest flow event and plenty cold enough for snowmaking. So if we can get through this weekend with a little bit of rain, a little bit of mild air, by the middle of next week, we really are going to set the table for probably a pretty good weekend next weekend, because we're going to have 2-3 days of cold air and snow. You can see that system moves out for the weekend, stays pretty cold. Another little brief ridge develops, but then another little system develops out west. So the pattern's getting a little more active here in January. The problem is this is kind of what we expected. A lot of ebb and flow, warm, cold, back and forth. The good news is none of the warm periods are lasting that long. The bad news, the cold periods aren't lasting long either. They're kind of going back and forth. This is your typical roller coaster setup. So as we go towards next weekend, you can see we've got maybe some snow moving into the southeast, some cold air trapped from the previous system, and then we go into the following weekend. You can see this system's something to keep an eye on. Now right now the track is mainly in the Great Lakes, but there's enough cold air. There's at least going to be a wintry mix here in the southeast, and as it moves through, another surge of cold air moves in on the backside, and you can see some northwest flow. So overall, the pattern is starting to progress to more of a colder pattern, but it's going to take another 3 or 4 days to get there. So our forecast, if you look at it going through the weekend, now don't get too excited for Saturday. This is just going to be a little bit of snow, and again, I wouldn't get too crazy about this, and maybe cold enough to make snow. I almost hesitate to put that because these are going to be marginal temperatures. Upper lows typically give you wet, heavy snow. not real great for making snow, but Mother Nature can help out. But the middle of next week, you can see both for our West Virginia, Virginia, and Maryland resorts in Carolina and Tennessee, cold air and natural snow likely Wednesday and Thursday. Now, a lot of that is going to be natural snow, but potentially some man-made snow there as well, because temperatures will be cold enough. This will be more of a northwest flow event than a big low pressure system. So if you have plans to go this weekend skiing, there's still some pretty good conditions, though it's kind of spring-like. End of next week into next weekend is starting to look really, really promising. Now, something else you're probably hearing a lot about online, we've seen something we've been hearing about for weeks, the polar vortex splitting into a couple different chunks and eventually colder air coming south. The thing about the polar vortex that a lot of people don't tell you is when it shows up that we're going to see potentially a polar vortex weakening, it shows up in the models a couple weeks out, but then it has to happen. And when it happens, there's a 2-week lag from when the cold air actually moves south. So we started hearing about this in December because it was showing up in the models, when in reality, this is about the time we started to see it developing. And once it develops, it takes another 2 weeks for it to actually move south. But what a lot of people don't tell you about the polar vortex, and we'll go back to my map, is when it breaks down up here, you always don't know where the cold air is going to go. Could go into Europe or even parts of Russia, could come down into Alaska and Western Canada or even the Pacific, or it could come down into the eastern US. These are all still options. Until it actually happens, we're not going to know. But there are signs, and I'm going to put the temperatures up here real quickly, that cold air is going to be on the move. And you could see maybe a chunk of it late next week showing up here in our guidance, a long range guidance, starting to move into the US. So this would be going into next weekend. So those are below zero temperatures up here in parts of Canada. That would be a good sign. So there's still the potential we could see a pretty significant pattern flip by mid-month, because that would be 2 weeks out from our warming event and our polar vortex weakening. But right now, it's not going to happen in the near term. So don't get too excited until about 2 weeks from now, really maybe around Martin Luther King weekend, that we will actually start to see a pretty significant cold snap and maybe even some storminess. If we could tap some cold air into this wet storm track, man, would we be getting a ton of snow right now. It's just a matter of getting the cold air to sync back up with that southern stream. So I hope you have a great weekend, everybody. And as always, as I always say, make sure you're thinking snow.